What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be talking about how to build a website for your podcast within just an hour. And we're back at it again with the no-code applications, and we're trying to make it as simple as possible so you save thousands of dollars and save a lot of time. So in today's episode, as I said, we're going to be using two tools to make a podcast website as very easy to use and very easy for someone to come in and update when you need to update it. The first one is called Anchor, which is a podcast distribution software that automatically connects your podcast to Spotify, iTunes, and all the other big podcast providers out there. And what's really cool about Anchor is that you just need to upload to them and they'll automatically do all the rest for you, create RSS feeds, they'll create embed codes, and you can also play it within Anchor itself. And so why I like this is because it creates a nice user interface for us to connect to Webflow, which is the second application that we use, which is a website builder, allows us to embed things, make automatic updates, and all the things that you would need to do to connect your podcast to a website. So as I said, the second tool is Webflow, and I absolutely adore Webflow. I think it's one of the best website builders out there. It allows for custom code embeds, it allows for CMSs, it allows for a lot of different customizations that you just can't get with other web builders. And so we're going to use some of the features like the CMS and the code embeds. So you will need a premium or pro account for Webflow and upgrade to a CMS hosting plan. So without further ado, let's get to the actual building component. Alrighty, now we get started with the actual nuts and bolts of what we're building. So over here, I have a bit of a website that I've made. It's called Ramen Rewind. It's a podcast that we were going to start but never ended up doing, but this is a good example for us to look at. So in terms of the actual basic layout and things like that, you'll see that there's like other stuff like a nav bar and there's like some other stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail on like how to build that out. If you want some support, I will be having an introduction to Webflow YouTube video coming out soon, which will teach you all the basics you need to know and like how I did these columns and even these artwork. Like I made these on Canva, so I'll even have an intro to Canva and some tutorials around that as well. But what we're going to talk about here is how to do these podcast integrations. So over here, I have something called the latest episode, which will just be an embed of the actual link for the latest episode, which I'm going to use Anchor. And then over here, I have previous episodes, which is just a collection. So a collection is the content management system at work. And then another collection for the most popular episodes. So episodes by views. And in this case, it's a little bit difficult for you to automate how that happens. Like, I'm sure there's a way to do it. But in this case, we're going to manually update those things. So the first step you need to take when doing this is upgrade your Webflow account. You do need a CMS hosting account. So you do need to pay for that. Once you have that, you'll get this functionality where you see there's three little cylinders on top of each other. That's the CMS button. So let's go to that. And what this allows you to do is create a collection of different items. So in this case, I'm going to create a collection for each podcast, right? So when I click the plus button, it comes up with a new collection. So in this case, I'm going to call it podcasts. And then I got to give it a couple of fields. So I'll have the name. So the name will just be like the title of the podcast, which I might rename to title. Slug is something that you can't really change. It's just like Webflow's internal referencing system. Like you do need that. So let's just leave that here, but we're not really going to use that. We're going to add some custom fields. In this case, the custom fields I'm going to add, let's have a look at the podcast. So in this case, I'm going to use the Draper Startup House podcast. It is different to Ramen Rewind. Let's have a quick look as to what it's actually using. So in this case, there's an image. There's some text here. There's the Draper Startup House podcast title, which is just the title of the podcast. There's the author's name, the host. Then over here for the actual episode, we have a different image art. We have the title for the podcast, the date, and we also have a link to play it. So there's a couple of different aspects to this, right, that we could be using. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put title. I'm going to put an image file because I think that would be nice to add. So let's say artwork, right? So that's going to be the next thing. Let's also add a link to the actual podcast. So link to the Anchor podcast. So we'll link it to, if I click on this, this is the actual episode page. So this is what it will link to. So I'm going to copy this link in. And then what else information? We have date, things like that. But I don't think that's super necessary. In this case, what you might want to do, because I have some guests for my podcast, I think it would be a nice touch to put the guest name as well. So I'm going to put guest name. And then maybe a bit of like a summary. Like, let's put a couple of sentence summary. And then maybe let's put a character count maximum of 200. Just so they don't get, just so we don't get carried away. That's it. That's our podcast collection. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And you might be missing some stuff. Who knows? You'll kind of figure it out as you build it. So now we have the podcast collection. I think we should go ahead and add some dummy items. So you can add 5 dummy items to basically understand how the collection works. Okay, so we have some dummy items. I'm also going to make some real items so we can see how it all plays out. In this case, let's use this example. So is culture causing premature death to startups? The artwork, I will need to save that in my downloads, and then I will copy it in from downloads. We have this here. Cool. So that artwork is there, and then I'm going to copy this link over here. Guest link here is Melody Chen, who is the guest. And then this podcast is about whether culture is a root cause of evil for startups. I don't know. Let's just put it as that and see how we go. So I'm going to go ahead and create this one here. So that would be the podcast. Yeah, so I have all my podcasts here. These are just some dummy values, as you can see here. Like, they're just very random. Here you can see that there's some interesting things happening with the text. That's because I made it a rich text item, which is probably a mistake in hindsight. It should probably just be a normal text input. But for now, let's just go ahead. So now what we want to do is go back to the podcast. I'm going to double click to make a connection. So if you don't have a collection item here, all you need to do is go to the plus button and look for collection list, and then you drag it in wherever you want. That's essentially what I've done to both these things. In the collection list, you're going to go source. Source here is podcasts, right? And I kind of want this layout where it's like one by one after each other. You can pick like if you want them to be in a column, so do that, or you can do it in rows like that. So that's fine. Like we've gone ahead and made that. Now the tricky part, it's not difficult, but what we'll have to do is create little items for each one, right? So I'm going to go ahead and drag an image into this first little collection item. And what will happen is it will actually duplicate for all the collection items, because all the collection items mirror each other. And then what I'll have the option of getting the image from podcasts. So I'm going to get the image from podcasts and then go artwork, which is that field. And so what's interesting is now what happens is all of the different collection items will get the image from that respective item. So in this case, this item is the first podcast. The next item is the second podcast, so on and so forth. So let's make this a little bit more pretty. So I'm going to drag in some columns into here. And what I'm going to do is essentially make it such that there's an image on the left and there's some text on the right. So this, yeah. So as you can see, it automatically sort of fills in the things. And then for each collection item, let's add some padding so it looks a bit nicer. So again, if you don't know what I'm doing here, and like in terms of spacing, I will have an introduction to Webflow class where you can follow along. So I've just added some padding to make sure it doesn't look too messy. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the width. So next we have a couple of different text items we're going to drag in. So So I'm going to drag in the title over here. Yep, so you can see all the titles have now come up. And then I can also add more text. So maybe let's add the guest. So again, you press the gear, get text from guest name, and that will have the guest name there. Again, these like sample ones didn't turn out too good, so like they're looking a little bit awkward, but it should still serve the purpose. And let's style this a little bit. Very, very simple styling. I'm not going to go overboard here. And the final touch will be the summary. So let's add the summary in as well. Okay. So for the summary, again, I've added a rich text item, which I overcomplicated it a little bit. But that means that I will need to use basically whatever type of item that you put into the collection, you need to make sure that you use the same sort of input here. So I'm going to use a rich text item. Alrighty, so I've gone ahead and fixed that up. So you can see that the image is there, the title, the guest, and then finally the other text. Now it's really up to you how you want to style it, what kind of information you add. And now all you really need to do, so you can control the actual display, right? So if you go to collection list and we press the gear on the right, it goes to element settings. In the element settings, you can basically see what kind of items are displayed, right? So if you go limit items, we can say that only show 3 items. So we only want 3 previous episodes. So now what's happened is all the other episodes have disappeared. So we only have these 3. And you can see if I change it to 5, we have even more things being displayed. Let's keep it at 2 or 3. And then what you can do is actually start, if you want only the previous episodes, and let's say we want the latest episode, which is the one I just uploaded, which is this top one here, to not show up, then what I can do is I can do start at 2. So only the last 2 previous episodes are actually here. And what happens is when you add a new episode, it will automatically move the latest episode down to the previous episodes because it's now number 2, and the latest episode will come up here. Now, popular episodes, that's up to you how you want to show it. You can just pick specific ones that you want to do, or that you can really play around with the settings there. But now that you know how to do previous episodes and use that function of adding different podcasts to your CMS and automatically updating, you can do all these things on the bottom. Now, I wanted to show you something a little bit more complicated, but can really make a big difference for your podcast website, and that's embedding and changing the embed code. So I'm going to drag up another collection list here. And then in the collection list, I'm going to go source, podcast, same as before. In this case, I want to immediately get rid of all of them because I just want to show one. I just want to show the latest episode. So there you go. And it's going to be a row. In this case, what I'm going to add is not like text box or anything. I'm going to drag in a code snippet directly. So an embed here. So if you go all the way down to components in the plus sign, elements, and embed, drag that into your collection list wrapper and put it in there. And now we're going to try something a little bit more tricky. So in this case, when you go to your actual, I'm using Anchor in this case, but if you don't use Anchor, there might be a different kind of embed form there. But it's just reading the embed code and trying to understand what it's actually doing. So in this case, I'm going to go back to my episode page. So this is the internal Anchor dashboard. So I can actually see the embed code. So I'm going to copy that. Copy embed. I'm going to put it into here. So when you read this embed code, it's really interesting because like this thing here, the source, the src, and in the brackets, this link is actually exactly the same as the link we put in for the actual podcast link, right? So if you go back to where we were before, sorry, I went back. Let's go forward slash. So it's anchor.fm and then it sort of ends in EOQMN. And that's actually the same link as here. So what I can do is I can delete this and add field link. And now what I've done is basically the latest podcast, and we've done that because we've limited the items to one, so the most recent item. So it's just going to put that link into here, and it's automatically going to embed it. Now the other interesting thing is that this height and width is obviously going to be a little bit more difficult to do because like you have a responsive website and you want to make sure that it actually goes the entire width. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the width to 100% and I'm going to set the height to auto. Alrighty, so now what you realize is the link is actually somewhat the same, so you can just go ahead and put that in as a custom field. But one other thing that you need to change to make sure that this actually works is that there's a slight difference between the embed code that you get and the actual link is like the public link available, and that's a little /embed. So if you go back to the item in link, you'll see that you need this embed part. So in the public link, you won't actually have episodes, you'll have that embed thing. What you can do also is just change it such that you only have a text input, right? And so your text input could purely be just this part because that's the only part that actually changes between the embeds. And then when you actually input it, instead of doing quotation marks link, you can put the actual like http://anchor blah blah blah.com/ and then put that link at the end, and that'll also work. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. It's just that essentially what it's doing is just replacing the text with that collection input, just like you did with the images and the text and all the other stuff. So now I click save, and you can see that the latest episode is automatically there, which is really cool. So you have your latest episode on the top and your previous episodes down below, and voila, you have a podcast website that is able to be updated very easily using a CMS, and you don't need to hire a developer or anything like that to do. And there you have it. We now have a website for our podcast on Webflow. Super easy to update. All you need to do is go into the CMS, add a new object, and then press publish, and you're good to go. I will have more episodes coming in the future about how to use Webflow in more detail, and also part 2 to this where we'll automate the entire process of when you upload a podcast to Anchor, it will automatically update your Webflow website, and we use Zapier for that. So look forward to that part 2. Right now I'm just trying to figure out the best, cleanest way to teach you that process, and then I'll have a video up as soon as I can. But if you're interested in these no-code episodes, basically this channel is going to transform into a no-code ninja channel where we just teach people how to use different no-code applications and how to master it. I think the future of no-code is extremely bright, and we have players like Webflow, Bubble, and all these other companies building amazing technologies behind it. And so I want to show you the different avenues that you could take to become a no-code developer, and also create products you would only dream of, or try to pay thousands of dollars to people to build for you. And so I want to make that a lot more accessible for all of you with these no-code technologies and by creating these tutorials. So if you subscribe, you'll get this kind of content every week, and you'll basically get the latest and greatest when it comes to no-code. That's it from me. I'll see you next time.